the Little Rock and Fort Smith Railroad ran out of funds, expanding west in the late 1800s. Thanks to a Boston businessman by the name of Lake Atkins, the railroad continued to move in parts of a generous donation. In response, a town would be placed along those same tracks where the railroad progress slowed and was named Atkins. Today, 65 miles west of Little Rock, along Interstate 40, you'll find that same small town. The town, which was formerly known for its pickle production, now has a new claim to fame.
You never know when you get that bite what it's going to be. You'll think, you're fixing to catch, there's another little 1-pound bass, and it might be a 12-pound bass.
Lake Atkins was created from Gallant and Horsehead Creeks as a recreation area, but has grown into so much more.
I don't know, Atkins is just the perfect climate to grow that big fish. This Florida hybrid likes this type of water that's here, and it likes a warmer water. It's got plenty of bait fish, but I would put Atkins as far as big bass against Dardanelle almost any tournament. Honestly, I would like to see that. I would like to see them pick a few anglers, say y'all fish Dardanelle, big bass, and a few anglers fish Atkins, big bass. And good anglers, ones that know each body of water, and I think Atkins will produce the biggest bass. I mean, they might not, if you put 10 anglers, they might not all 10 have a huge bass. Dardanelle, everybody might have a bass, but I think the total biggest bass will come out of Atkins. There's just consistently more big fish.
Yeah, our little lake has turned into something else that I never expected, or my husband either. But it's really taking on with these bass and our crappie. We have big crappie as well. The largest bass I've ever weighed in since I've had it has been 13 pounds. The largest crappie I've weighed in was 4.1 pounds, and it's big. It looks like a small bass, doesn't it?
The Arkansas Game and Fish Commission constructed Lake Atkins in 1956. The lake in itself spans 752 acres.
The lake used to be known as a brim lake. I mean, you look in the old newspapers and old game and fish catalogs, and you'd see a lot of talking about, always had a fair bass population, but the crappie and the brim was always what drawing people here.
The fishing has been such an integral part of the community that you can see thousands of pictures of successful fish stories.
It's just history here. It's been here so long, Lake Atkins I get great-grandparents who come in here and show their kids or, their grandkids pictures of them on the walls from when they were little. So, it's just being here and seeing all the happenings on this lake. It's changed a lot, but I think it's all for the good. People are amazed at the pictures because I think the earliest goes back to about 1970. So, and they're Polaroids, those were, and a lot of them have faded, and a lot of them have been taken down because they can't, you can't see them anymore. So, but yeah, it just gives you such a feeling of home, and family, and that's what fishing's all about.
My father-in-law, he remembers coon hunting when it was nothing but bottoms and creek beds, before they ever built the lake. He used to coon hunt it, and me and him would go fishing, and he'd point, I used to set traps over there, and used to be a sawmill over there, and at one time this was a fish farm. They had catfish farming industry here. They had, up on the levee end, they had cranes and big baskets down in the lake where they raised catfish. But I guess that kind of phased out before I ever started fishing the lake. But my father-in-law, he's good to fish with because he'll tell you some stories. I don't know if they're all true, but he'll tell you a lot of stories about it.
Lake Atkins had a strong reputation for consistent fishing. However, in the early 1990s, the lake's productivity began to falter as the bigmouth buffalo got into the system and quickly overtook the water. So much so that 60% of the total weight of fish collected in a 2,000-year sample was that of the bigmouth buffalo.
So when you get gizzard shad in a lake and you get bigmouth buffalo in a lake, those fish are fairly low on the food chain, and normally they act as forage fish. However, gizzard shad can grow larger than the gape size of largemouth bass, and if the population of large gizzard shad gets too large, then what you have is a situation where the forage base isn't actually available to the more desirable fish like white bass or largemouth bass or crappie. The other fish that had kind of exploded in population in Lake Atkins was bigmouth buffalo. That is a midwater feeder, but it feeds fairly low on the food chain. It also gets too large for the largemouth bass or the crappie to eat. And so when you tie up a lot of biomass in fish that can't be eaten by sport fish, you end up having a weaker sport fishery.
The Game and Fish would completely drain the lake in 2002 for a fish kill, as opposed to prior plans to lower the levels so that commercial anglers could harvest the buffalo, but only one angler participated. During the lowering of the lake, the dam gates malfunctioned, allowing a perfect opportunity to drain the lake almost completely to restart the habitat.
And they did a lot of, piling up brush piles and kind of making some fish structure.
The lake went down to 25 acres of water left at its lowest level. During the process, hundreds of people came to pick up fish. Game and Fish biologists counted 22,000 excess fish along the shoreline, more than 3,500 of those being crappie. After the updates, they would add 750 tons of lime along the lake bed with winter wheat to add cover.
Lake Atkins is a eutrophic lake, which means that it has quite a lot of nutrients, and we do fertilize the lake each year. It also has a fairly good amount of structure in the lake without being choked out, as some of the other lakes, especially in the wooded parts of Arkansas, can get. Both of these things were supportive of having a trophy fishery there.
When discussing trophy fish, largemouth bass are one of the first species that come to mind.
There are two strains of largemouth bass. Some scientists actually are now considering them two separate species, and we consider it the northern largemouth bass and the Florida largemouth bass. The Florida largemouth bass, of course, is the bass that was native in Florida. It tends to grow larger. It tends to be harder for anglers to catch, but because it does grow larger, it's very popular with anglers. The northern strain largemouth bass is the bass that was native to Arkansas and further north. It does not grow quite as large, but it is more well adapted to conditions in Arkansas. Game and Fish makes a determination on a lake-by-lake basis as to whether or not our lakes would support a population of Florida bass or northern strain largemouth bass.
The Game and Fish would elect to place 75,000 1.5-inch Florida stream bass in the lake, making it the northernmost lake in Arkansas with the specific species.
15-inch minimum length limit on largemouth bass. That was intended to protect the broodstock that we were putting in there, that were going to become basically the parents of the new fish. And then we've been watching the fish population over time and moving a protective slot limit to especially protect the broodstock that had been placed into the lake. That took from 2008 until 2012 on the protective slot limit. The remaining protective slot limit is there in order to ensure the production of trophy largemouth bass.
Bass growth is considered good if they reach 13 inches in 3 years. In 2008, the AGFC Black Bass Program conducted an age growth survey and found that bass were reaching 13 inches in just 1 year and 3 months.
No, it was not really a surprise. We've seen in the population structures for several years large fish in the 20-inch, 21-inch size classes in the population. Of course, those fish are now getting into 24, 25, or even larger. This is why we run a protective slot limit on that lake. In a protective slot limit, we want anglers to remove small fish, but then once they get to be large enough, 16 inches, we want them to have a chance to become trophy fish. And the protective slot limit seems to be working on Lake Atkins. There's some situations where the protective slot limit doesn't work, but certainly for this lake, it does seem to be working as intended.
I'm not the only person, but I think the state record bass is going to come out of this lake. If it don't come out of this lake this year, it'll come out of here at least by next year. If not, it's just because they ain't caught it yet. There's some huge bass in this lake, and it's an odd lake. It warms up pretty quick. It's not a deep lake. It's a stumpy, got a lot of buckbrush, big cypress forest, got a lot of cypress trees.
16 pounds and 8 ounces is the current state record.
That's a big fish.
Do you think that's it?
Yeah, it's here. I know it's here. I wish I could point to it and say, you fish right there and you're gonna catch it. I've got a few diehards that when the time is right, they'll fish, like the guys that work nights, they'll come out here as soon as they get off work. I mean, it'll be 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and they'll fish till 9, 10 in the morning, and they'll go home. And then the guys that work days, they'll come out here as soon as they get off work, and they'll fish till 10 o'clock at night. And they won't go 200 yards from this boat ramp. I mean, they'll be right out here. And it's funny, that a boat pulls up beside them and they stick their rod down in the boat where you can't see what they're throwing, or they'll look around like they're drinking a Coke, act like there's nothing there to be fishing. But I got some diehards that they know it's here, and that's all they're wanting. They're wanting that state record. And they're not fishing Dardanelle every day. They're coming down here every day. Certain times of the year when the time is right, when fish are at their biggest, every single day. I ain't gonna name names because everybody in River Valley probably knows a lot of them. A lot of them's got Facebook pages. But this is where they come. They're wanting that state record. And they're not fishing the river, they're not fishing Lake Dardanelle. I mean, they'll fish tournaments there. I mean, I see them talking about tournaments all the time. But when they go pleasure fish, trying to catch that state record, they'll come here. And it's here, and they ain't caught it yet. And I mean, to be that big, it ain't a stupid fish. You're gonna have to, right place, right time, but it's here.
Many things are possible. It's a good lake. The fish seem to be growing well in that lake. The population structures all look good. It's certainly possible that we could see a state record come out of that lake, but the state records are few and far between, especially for a fish like largemouth bass. So certainly an angler could go out there and hope to catch a trophy fish, hope to catch a fish they're going to remember for the rest of their life. But a state record, you don't know where the next state record's going to come from.
I've got bass fishermen that they'll fish all day long just for that one bite. They're wanting that state record. The lake record right now is 13 pounds, but the state record's here. I mean, it is here. There's probably several of them in this lake. It just hadn't been caught yet, but it's in here. And there ain't anybody that fishes this lake consistently that won't tell you that, because they've hooked them, had it turned, popped their line, or got hung up in the brush, or caught it on live bait and it didn't really count. But the state record bass is in here. It just hadn't been caught and weighed on a certified scale yet. But I'm positive it's in here.
The lake's reputation may have grown even quicker than the fish have, as people from all walks of the country travel to Pope County to wet their line.
Indiana, Colorado. That's the furthest, Colorado. Yeah. Wow. It's amazing. But there's a lot, from the closer states, Oklahoma and Texas as well, Louisiana.
And crappie fishing is the most frustrating fishing you can do, because it's always, everybody you see, oh man, you should have been here yesterday. It's always, you should have been here yesterday. Crappie fishing, if you want to catch good crappie, this is the place to come. But don't come one time, because you come one time to figure out where they're at. You come the second time to catch them. The people that fish here consistently, are the ones that you'll see are catching the big fish, the big numbers, because crappie, they move. And now that we got that Florida hybrid in here, they're after the same thing them crappie are as them shad. Well, the crappie will follow them shad, and then the bass are following the shad, and then the crappie don't like to compete with the bass, so they'll move out, and the bass will move in. So you might, over here at this other lake, the other dock on the other side of the lake, everybody's showing up with minnows trying to catch crappie, and they're catching, 10 and 12, 11 pound bass on minnows trying to catch crappie. And they're just getting mad, throwing them back in. I want crappie. Well, then the people are showing up in droves because they see all these people catching all these bass, and your bass fisherman, he's throwing crankbaits and buzz baits and spinner baits, and he's not catching them because they're catching them on minnows. But crappie, you might catch 100 of them 10 inches long, but then you might catch one of them, 4 pounds. There's some good fish in this lake, and it's a fun lake.
As the sun sets on Lake Atkins, multiple fishermen are out there trying their chance at catching a state record or perhaps even dinner. Nonetheless, the beautiful sight of the water is as good excuse as any to come out and try this hidden gem in the river valley.
If you enjoy fishing, just getting out, relaxing, fishing, put in the time, you'll catch the fish. It doesn't matter really where you go on the lake, you're going to catch a fish. Depends on what you're fishing for and what you're fishing with. But if you just like getting out and relaxing, enjoying time with family and friends, and just enjoying what God's given us, it's a good place to go.